There's been some huge advancements in MotoGP technology over the years that's made riders faster than ever. Probably the most recent massive change is the introduction of massive aero packages fitted on today's modern MotoGP bikes. However, a lot of these advancements you can see pretty easily. I mean, these aren't exactly hard to miss, are they? But what about the things you don't see that are buried deep within a modern bike? Well, an incredibly important engineering development are the modern clutches that are used today. They're absolutely genius, and I'm going to explain exactly how they work and how they make MotoGP riders faster. Before we dive more into that, let's quickly go over how a conventional clutch works and the problems that riders used to face on track. It's going to help with understanding just how clever modern clutches are. A conventional clutch has a few key parts. You've got the pressure plate, held in place with screws and springs. You have the clutch pack, which is made up of alternating steel and friction plates. The inner hub connects directly to the gearbox input shaft, and everything is held neatly within the clutch basket. It might sound like a lot, but the way a conventional clutch works is pretty straightforward. The whole purpose of a clutch is to transfer power from the engine to the wheel. The engine generates power, which is converted into rotational motion by the crankshaft. This rotational power is then sent to the clutch basket, which is connected to the engine. Inside the clutch assembly, the friction plates have teeth on their outer edges that connect to the clutch basket, while the steel plates have teeth on their inner edges that connect to the inner hub, which is connected to the gearbox. What this means is both the inner hub and the basket can spin independently of one another when needed. Now, there isn't just one friction plate and one steel plate. That just wouldn't be enough. The clutch pack has multiple alternating friction and steel plates stacked together. This increases the surface area, which generates more friction. The more plates there are, the greater the surface area, and the more friction can be generated when the clutch is engaged. When the clutch is disengaged, which is when you pull on the clutch lever, pressure is released, which separates the friction and steel plates, allowing them to spin independently, stopping the transfer of engine power to the gearbox. When the clutch is engaged, which is when you release the clutch lever, the springs push the pressure plate against the clutch pack, forcing the friction and steel plates together. This locks the clutch basket and inner hub together, allowing engine power to flow through the inner hub to the gearbox, and eventually to the rear wheel. The friction and steel plates are key to controlling power transfer. When they're pressed together, power flows through to the rear wheel. When they're separated, power's cut off. Now, on the normal public road, this type of clutch works pretty well. But on track, when you're pushing the bike to the limit, the older MotoGP bikes with conventional clutches have some pretty big issues, and they can be really difficult to control. Let me explain. At some point on every racetrack, a rider has to brake and downshift incredibly hard. Take a look at these examples of professional riders in what's considered a big braking zone. What's common between all of them? You'll notice the front forks compressing and sometimes the rear wheel lifting off of the ground slightly. So why does this happen? Well, in these big braking zones, MotoGP riders are always braking as late and as hard as possible, generating an insane amount of stopping force. Under braking, the weight of the bike shifts forward, which is especially noticeable in these bigger braking zones. Take the first corner at places like Mugello, Red Bull Ring and Catalunya. The front suspension forks compress a huge amount, and with the load of the bike being shifted to the front, the rear goes light as there's less weight pushing the rear wheel into the ground, which can cause some problems. But there's something else that helps them slow down even faster. It's called engine braking. Engine braking is generated when a rider closes the throttle and the engine's resistance slows the bike down. The higher the RPM, the stronger the engine braking effect. Have a listen to this on board. Notice as soon as they brake, they're downshifting as much as they can to generate as much engine braking as possible. Today's video is sponsored by Aura, and it's a pretty important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security number of every single American. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from national public data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birthdays. And members of the hacker group have reportedly released this information for free online. For me at least, that doesn't fill me with a huge amount of confidence that my data is safe online. And if you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a huge wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable than you are online right now. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, email, or social security number on the dark web. They're going to let me know fast if anyone tries to use that information to access my credit or my bank accounts. They give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. You can go to my link aura.com/absolutedan to try 14 days for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find if any of your personal information is exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now, because not only is national public data not going to do anything to help you, they probably aren't even going to face any repercussions from this leak. I'm not leaving myself to vulnerable data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/absolutedan to try 2 weeks for free. Alright, back to the video. So what are the actual problems with conventional clutches on track? On older racing bikes, whenever a rider used hard braking and aggressive downshifting, the engine RPM would suddenly increase. Now, as I just mentioned, this was helpful for engine braking, but it was also much harder to control. With a conventional clutch, when the engine RPM spikes, the engine and rear wheel speeds fall out of sync. The engine tries to force the rear wheel to rotate at the new engine speed. This mismatch can cause the rear wheel to lock up and start hopping or chattering, because the rear wheel momentarily loses grip, which, as you can imagine, going from 200 miles an hour with the rear wheel locking and bouncing around all over the place isn't exactly confidence inspiring. You see, stability is a huge part of the key to fast lap times. An unstable bike doesn't give the rider confidence, and it's hard to extract a good lap from the bike. So if it was this much of a problem, what did riders do to control it? Well, the riders of the time had to partially pull in the clutch under heavy braking to allow a little bit of slip. What this did was reduce the amount of engine braking being applied to the rear wheel, and allowed the rear wheel to spin more freely, helping it to match the road speed. This made the bike a lot more stable, but it required constant clutch management in heavy braking zones. And along with everything else a rider had to do, it just gave them one more thing they needed to manage. It certainly wasn't easy. And this is where modern advancements in technology came in, with the invention of the slipper clutch. As you can probably guess, it allows some slip in the clutch. But how exactly does it work, and how does it make riders faster? A slipper clutch is technically a torque limiting device. It's called that because it limits the amount of torque transferred from the rear wheel back to the engine under deceleration. But a slipper clutch has the same core parts as a regular clutch: the pressure plate, clutch basket, friction plates, steel plates, and an inner hub. But it has one major difference: a mechanism that allows controlled slip when necessary. Remember earlier I talked about riders manually slipping the clutch to control the rear wheel locking and to stop chattering. Well, a slipper clutch does the exact same thing, but it's done automatically. Under acceleration, the slipper clutch works like any other normal clutch. The secret to how the slipper clutch works is in its ramps and cams. The clutch has angled ramps built into the pressure plate and the inner hub. When a rider comes into a really heavy braking zone and starts to downshift, the rear wheel tries to spin faster than the engine. The ramps allow the pressure plate to move ever so slightly, which releases some of the pressure on the clutch pack. This slip means the clutch plates no longer fully lock together, and this reduces the amount of engine braking being transferred to the rear wheel. Once the engine speed and rear wheel speed match, the force applied to the clutch reduces and the pressure plate moves back down off of the ramp. And the rider now has a normal clutch again, ready to accelerate out of a corner. That doesn't sound ideal, as riders want as much engine braking as possible, and they do have a couple of clever electronic systems to help with this, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. But a slipper clutch can make riders faster by providing more stability. There's a much lower risk of locking up and chattering, and with this increased confidence on the bike, it naturally allows riders to go faster. Obviously, with this being MotoGP, a team and rider can adjust the slipper clutch to maximize the pace of the bike. The amount of slip is carefully controlled by the design of the ramps and the spring strength. The steeper the ramps, the more easily the clutch can slip. And the softer the springs, the more easily the pressure is released, and vice versa. This means teams can fine-tune the slipper clutch for specific tracks and also rider preference. Now, slipper clutches have been around for quite a while now, but they still aren't perfect. When slipper clutches were first introduced, riders had to manually apply a little bit of pressure to the clutch lever and use a small amount of throttle mid-corner to control the engine braking and to avoid crashing, especially as grip decreased later in the races. But the way modern slipper clutches have evolved, they're an incredibly important and pivotal part that helps riders and teams find lap time. If you want to learn more about MotoGP engineering, then check out this video here, where I explain how riders can lean more than ever before. Thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.